But again, funny thing for the first speaker I'm going to introduce, Mike Lewis, is it's same thing, how things tend to go around in your life. When you mentioned to somebody at lunch 25 years, it's actually been 31 years. So I'm finding as we get older, the years kind of speed up. But Mike and I first met when I was working at a community development corporation in Nanaimo. And Mike and several partners were a consulting company called the West Coast Development Group based out of Port Alberta at that time, and did several studies for us, and they were sort of leaders at that time, certainly in community economic development research. Mike is also, has since formed many years ago a group called the Centre for Community Renewal, Canadian Centre for Community Renewal, has written several books, and Mike is very well known in community economic development circles. And again, as a personal favor to me, he just came back from giving the keynote at the Rural Ontario Summit not even a week ago. Basically came home, switched suitcases, said hello to some family, had a bit of time with them, and left early on Mother's Day in order to join us in Kelowna to come. But we had asked Mike to sort of lay the foundation before we get that. Hopefully the way this you'll see sort of the evolution is we're going to talk sort of general in one province, very specific in the province, general, and then specific in each province. So with that, Mike, take it away.
Thank you. Well, let me just say, by way of opening, met him 31 years ago, and I just want to say how interesting it is to have three United Church people standing up and having kind of made this initial contribution, because in fact, I wouldn't be here or been on the path I'm on if it wasn't for the United Church. So there's a circle there that is very important. And in fact, Sandra Mark, I met a long time ago, probably around 31 years ago, at a National United Church Economic Justice Forum in Toronto, I think we had it, I'm not sure where. So, it's definitely not just the old boys network.
That's the old guys.
When Sandra's around, most of the men can't keep up. Anyway, I'm just delighted to be here at Christina Lake. Very happy to be with this group of people here. And my job here is not to get into the alternatives. I often kind of give the big picture quick and then get right into the alternatives, because people don't usually like the bad news. They just want to concentrate on the good news, and I think all of us are going to do that, and you're going to get some of that, so don't expect it from me. Not that the theme of mobilizing rural capital isn't an exciting and hopeful process. It is. I just want to lay out the bigger picture within which I think we need to understand the question of, well, you can see what I put up here, which is kind of a funny slide to kind of put up at the beginning of this kind of conference. This little girl here was my oldest grandchild about, I would say, 10 years ago. She's 13 now. She was maybe 2 or 3 then. And when I say our money, our children, our home, putting capital in perspective, this little child, right, is growing, is living on that little dot there over on the left. And that little dot has got its challenges. So our assumptions about mobilizing capital, the assumptions about what capital is for and how we think about it, is kind of very different than what I grew up in. But I was socialized into the culture and assumptions that I worked with. So let's. So we know, of course, in the rural context, many parts. I started my first community organizing job hired by the United Church in Alberta for $100 a month. And I worked both ends of town, the Indian side of town and the white side of town, and tried to build some bridges. And I could see then a rural community that was thriving at the time, early 70s, 1970s. If you go back there today, you won't see hardly a fishing boat in that community. You will not see many people or meet many people who are working in the forest industry any longer. In fact, we did 25 years ago, because the whole coast was suffering, is what we call the coastal survival strategy, coastal community survival strategy. In any case, you know this story. Consumer dollars go out, businesses leave. That's okay. I think you can resonate with the fact that rural communities have this struggle. Now, it's also true that we have another migration from rural communities, or from urban communities into rural communities. I think you know well, perhaps in a place like Christina Lake, or you go into the East Kootenays, everybody's seen what's happened to property prices as people from Calgary get older and they start moving for vacation homes and they for retirement homes, and you know that becomes part of the pattern. So we get this funny kind of place we're in rural communities, and it's very different in different settings, but it's a really important part of the context. In any case, as I said, you know, this whole notion, I came from kind of a social justice perspective, I came kind of from a faith perspective in my early years, and I decided that as I saw the dislocation taking place, the answer was growth with equity. Now that rings true for a lot of rural communities who feel there may be growth that's going on around them, but what's being left behind and sticking, right? And I know I was talking to the Mayor of Caslo, I mean, it's an old issue in rural communities that why is there not some means by which capital is retained in the communities for reinvestment in the communities. But that's not how our political economy has kind of evolved over the last 40 or 50 years. So that's kind of the orientation I had. Now, I'll start with my grandchild, now you get my perspective as a rodent on this question of growth and capital. Because we are at a different point than I was born in 1952. Or we didn't know in 1952 what we know now. Now this little hamster here, and I'm going to go to the big picture here now. When it was born, it was 3 grams. And it doubled its weight every week until it got to 6 weeks. And at 6 weeks, it stopped. It had reached its genetic kind of imprint and how far it could go given its makeup. Now, the question is, what would have happened if that darling little hamster would have continued to grow for the next 40 whatever weeks, you know, to 1 year? Well, you'd have a 9 billion ton hamster, right? And it would be eating the entire annual corn production from the globe on a daily basis and still be hungry. Go figure, eh? Are you inspired yet? Go ahead. So really quick, you're going to have to click through these.
Okay.
Just one. Okay, that's good. You go to the next one. There you see the trend lines in world population. That's 1859. We're starting. That's when oil was discovered in near Sarnia. The Americans think it happened in Pennsylvania, but it didn't. Anyway, go to the next one. So you got GDP from the time of Jesus to the time we had 1859. You know, we maybe grew somewhere, the debate is 4 to 6 times our GDP, and now just keep going. Okay, so there you go. We're at 69 trillion today, and we're projected to go to 180 trillion globally. I'll put the next one up, and what we see, of course, is carbon. Sorry to bring this up, folks, but a lot of people are here from Zero Action Coalitions. Keep going. And we know, you know, we're at 400 parts per million now, and we're going to 555 if we don't turn the corner. Okay, next corner. Next one. So the question is, capital for what? Right? We have a changing context, whether we like it or not. That is a reality we face, and the problem we have, now look at this. This is a very, very interesting slide. Now, that started in 1960, so I was about 8 years old then, and we were still living within one Earth, so to speak. We're at 1.4 right now. That is, we're consuming more resources than we're capable of replenishing, given what we know right now. And on a moderate basis, on a moderate business as usual basis, we're headed to 3 Earths. by 2050. So investing for what? What is our capital for in this context? How do we come to terms with this? This is difficult for us as human beings to even begin to contemplate how we move that transition back to one Earth. Okay. Now, look at it. I grew up in the motel business in Calgary. Mom, she was a single mom, right? She had 2 kids. I wasn't around yet. She owned her own motel, ran a gas bar, and had a convenience store and a little 8-unit motel. So I knew about making money. I grew up knowing about making money and hard work and all this kind of stuff. And in a sense, when we hit the 80s, remember, how many of you remember the 80s at interest rates of 20%? Yeah. Well, my mom just happened to be there at the right time, right? And you know what? She just put a little bit of money in there, and 20%. And she was also smart, you know, she knew. You know, she kind of bought a piece of property and she'd kind of hold it for 6 years, live in it for a little while, and then she could never find a good manager for the motel, so she'd go back to the motel and she'd sell the house and she'd make some money there too. And that's kind of what I grew up with, you know, just nourish it, make the money grow. But there's some interesting pieces here that I just want to talk a little bit about, because I don't think we're going to navigate the challenges we have to navigate unless we kind of look at our own assumptions. And that's hard to do. For me, believe me, that little grandchild, when she really came into my life and I started to learn about some things that have been on the edge of my consciousness, but not fully there, around fossil fuels and what was happening and how do we deal with this, and I got depressed. And I started doing a lot of work, and this one, where my mother was making so much money when I was at 20%, this is a very interesting, there's hidden implications just to this basic thing that we take for granted, okay? Now, this is based on German research. This has been done by more than one academic, this research. Think about businesses, and businesses are part of supply chains, and supply chains are financed, right? Their capital for investments financed, their debt is financed for working capital. And what's the embedded cost? This was the question. How much of what you and I buy, or we are purchasing as a local government, right, for the sewage or for the water system or for this or that, is embedded costs as a result of compound interest? Well, that is the answer. Think about that. 35% of the embedded costs in Germany, they figure, in the supply chains in businesses and governments is the result of interest compounding on interest. It starts to feel like that 9 billion ton. But look at the other implication that's hidden in this. Go ahead. Oh, she'll find it. Anyway, I'll keep talking here. There you are. So you hear more and more. Hey, how many of you have been hearing about inequality all the time? You've been reading about Thomas Piketty, the French economist, and you know, not only the 1% and 99%, it's now talking about 1%, 99% within the 1%. What you got is a transfer from the bottom 80% of the population in Germany to the top 20% or the top 10%. 600 million euro a day. We don't think about that. And we are not going to navigate and find our way through based on that kind of pattern. Now, I'm not saying compound interest is solving that's the whole question, but put the last one in. This is the thing that brings us back to this question of capital for what. And in this case, debt-based financing means we have to grow that business, and we have to do it faster than the debt's going. I'll just tell you a little fact. You go to the 1993 Auditor General's report to the Parliament of Canada, and there's, that's okay.
Wasn't it? Okay.
There's a little piece in the back which is kind of an instruction to parliamentarians as to why has our debt in 18 years reached 537 billion when was only 37 billion before. Well, we know our answer. Profligate government spending, this, that. What she said, or he said, I don't remember whether it was a she or he, but was that as soon as we moved into a situation where we were not creating part of our own finance mechanism, our own low interest cost money through the Bank of Canada, and went to all of it coming through the banks, then what we have is we have this increased debt. And this increased debt has reached the point where in that year, 85% of that debt is a result of compounding interest on compounding interest. It is absolutely astounding, okay? So this is one part of it. The other thing, just in the global sense, you know, we have a real economy globally right now around 70 trillion, and go ahead. And we have, well, casino economy, speculative economy. Think of derivatives and subprime mortgages and whirling around. You know, that kind of economy making money off money. That's around 700 trillion. It's not that we don't have money circulating around the globe. There's a lot of money out there, but it's not connected into mechanisms where it's subject to goals that seem to me to be more and more appropriate as we begin to realize kind of the fix we're in. And that includes the fix we're in rural communities. So this is the challenge in my view. How do we move from the growth imperative, which I think, you know, all of us know and have been part of thinking about that, just as I said earlier, growth with equity, but growth in and of itself, to a resilience imperative. And essentially what the resilience imperative is talking about is how do we keep the core functions that are absolutely crucial in our communities, if you will, or in our ecological and social framework. How do we keep those functions alive and working and coherently operating in the face of great stress? Right? And we are in situation, and will become more and more so in situations of great stress. So this is my bad news story, is it ain't gonna get easier, right? The pain is not gonna go away in some simple way. So what does that mean then for how we navigate our way forward? So, you know, in the book, we talk about a number of things, but, you know, how do we invest in a way that reduces carbon, that strengthens our resilience, because we're going to have to adapt whether we like it or not. Rural communities have been having to struggle for adapting for a long time. How do we meet more of our basic needs closer to home, because we're more vulnerable. The global kind of supply chain is more vulnerable than it's ever been. And how do we bring more of this capital home from that market, which has no interest whatsoever in Christina Lake or the Kootenays, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is an interesting. Now, so I'm just going to say a little bit about this because, and there's many, many reasons to mobilize capital in rural communities. You know, and as you'll find out, retention of existing businesses is a big one, given us old folks, you know, who are moving into a different point in our life. And how do you find that, you know, new folks to come in? And how do you deal with the capital questions? And how do you mobilize that? And in terms of farming, that's a huge issue. Friggin' farmland in Canada, you were saying today, somebody was talking about 20% in the last year. This is impossible. How are we going to deal with these questions? It's really difficult. So, I just want to, you're going to have to, something happened here.
Something happened.
Anyway, there's three basic needs that we concentrate on in the book because we think where there's the greatest threat, sometimes there's also the greatest potential for innovation, and people are organizing because they can feel what's going on, and a lot of people are starting to understand. So you can see the local food movement. You look at the kind of strong desire to move to renewable energy and shelter, which is a huge issue in different communities in different ways. So we look at these and we look at the innovations in each of these, but their cross weave of this is three basic functions. Go ahead and another one. And among them, of course, reclaiming finance. Doesn't matter, and you could add business retention here. You could, you know, you put in your weave, but you know, and we're here today because finance, reclaiming finance, reinserting social goals into the financial decision making, right? Not to be stupid about it from a business point of view, but this is not just about maximizing return from a financial point of view. So the bottom line has to be broadened, otherwise that capital isn't going to do its job. Go to the next one. This next one, reclaiming the commons. We live and have had, particularly in the last 40 years, a huge, if you will, I mean, I suppose the political word is privatization going on. You know, I've been president of 2 forestry firms. I've done a lot of different kinds of things in business over the years. And the difficulty on the rural context is the commons have been appropriated and the resources have been decoupled from the places within which people live and work. That has been a problem in our historical development in rural areas for the last several years. And the last one here, which I think is very important, how do we localize and democratize ownership over time? We're going to go on and talk about alternatives in each one of those areas. You would, you know, could go to Sweden in the southeast where they made a decision in 1999. It was a rural area, 1,100 square kilometers, 26 communities, Christian stuff. They decided we're going to be fossil fuel free. And through 2 companies that are municipally owned by that district municipality, one a waste management company, the other one a utility, guess where they are? In 8 years, they were halfway to that goal. Now, the last half is harder, but they're making steady progress. And in fact, they're almost at the point they're going to be exporting green energy outside of their region. They are in a way more resilient position than many of our communities in the rural context of British Columbia. And having democratizing and localizing the ownership has been a key piece of that for them. Okay, so here we are. And what you're going to hear about today is there is money. That's the funny thing. There's money in rural communities. But quite a lot of money in the rural communities is flowing, in terms of capital, out into the marketplace. It's going into those global markets. It's going into, often with an orientation, and I'm not immune from this. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to, you know, I'm not trying to suggest I'm a United Church saint or anything like that. You know, but you have this money flow out. And how do you capture that? Is there ways of doing that? And all I want to say to you before setting it up for these folks is there are, and I'm not saying it's the whole answer yet, but it's growing. And it's not just growing in terms of what you're going to hear today. It's growing in all kinds of exciting ways, and it's not just in the Western world either. And it's a struggle, and it's tough. But, okay, I think, and I want to talk, just close with this, what I call the pedagogy of sea change. Social, ecological, and economic change. Because we are in an unprecedented sea change in human history. And anybody wants to argue about that? You know, we'll drink beer after this, and we'll argue. But, the first thing is, you know, seeing the world differently. You know, if we only go with our old assumptions, we don't develop some peripheral vision, we're not going to see the landscape as it is, and how are we going to navigate a landscape that we have as fogged in by virtue of still thinking around assumptions that no longer make common sense. And then seeking strategic pathways. I really think that what you guys are going to be hearing about, talking about today, and what Sandy and you have all been working on here locally, is you're seeking strategic pathways to deal with this problem. that rural communities face is nobody's going to come in from outside and see. So how are you going to mobilize your own resources in a way that's different than old assumptions? So those strategic pathways are really important. Obviously, we're here. This is part of the pedagogy. We're sharing what we learn more broadly, and you all have given leadership to helping make this happen. And then finally, securing the gains. This is the quadruple S, I guess. But, none of this happens without contention. Let's not be kidding ourselves about there not being conflict embedded in this process. And when gains are made, you need to be able to federate. And I think one of the things that's been happening with people like Gord and Grace and others, that they're out there, turning cranks and murdering the people and trying to federate, trying to get policy changes that will support rather than thwart this kind of effort on the part of local communities. And over time, it doesn't matter whether it's in food or energy, if we are going to secure gains that are made, we have to federate and we have to be able to defend those changes, no matter what part of the political spectrum we may sit on in terms of party politics. So the last one I think is, this is my view, you may not all agree with it, that we somehow, at this point, need to figure out and think about and consider when we're thinking about mobilizing capital. How do we mobilize capital to transition, for transition to live within limits? Not just to maximize growth, because number one, it isn't going to happen. We're already in entropy. And we do need to strengthen our capacity to collaborate, cooperate, and make things happen in a different kind of way. So thank you very much.
I'm not sure, I didn't see one hand go up. Yeah, go ahead.
We're talking about compound interest, and essentially compound interest is a promise of sorts, right? The banks in Canada can borrow money that doesn't exist. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on whether using the gold benchmark is part of the problem, because salt and anything tangible has an immediate value. Historically, we've used gold, but if we're exchanging money and instruments that we can't easily identify with, have we essentially lost the meaning of money?
Well, I don't know that I'm the best person to ask that question to. Let me just say this. What I do believe is worthwhile. It was in 1935 the Bank of Canada was created. In 1938, the Bank of Canada was nationalized. Okay? So it was a wholly owned subsidiary of the federal government. All right? So it was owned by the people of Canada through the federal government. What they did is that bonds, right, that were floated and bought, and that the federal government paid interest to the Bank of Canada on, they were able to reclaim as dividends. Right, because of the profits that were built into the transaction. And what they did is they had essentially a crown corporation that essentially spent that money into the economy. The Trans-Canada Highway, the St. Lawrence Seaway, the war, right? The aspects of laying in the cornerstones for our social security system. Right? And not some of the major airports. All this major infrastructure was basically done with about 1%. So when in 73, the international, what they call that, the international bank, where all the bank, pardon? No, it wasn't the International Monetary Fund. Anyway, it's the clearinghouse for central banks out of Basel, Switzerland. They all came and started lobbying, to have the banks take over that money creation function. Banks, when you go in and get a loan, they're creating new money, right? So banks have that totally within their hand. We only create 3% of our own money in Canada in coins and, the bills that we pass around. So the long and the short of it is, it's kind of a macro issue that does thwart governments of all kinds, especially at a time when, you know, what every municipal government's going to face is the tax issue, right? Well, in fact, for these major infrastructure issues that we face in all kinds of communities around basic needs, around water, sewer, sea level rise now, the estimate cost in Vancouver is $10 billion just to bring the dikes up to a 1 meter rise. How's that going to be financed? We showed that we could do it. It was non-inflationary. It was spent directly into the economy. That flowed back to the banks, and they were able to extend it in terms of credit. So it was kind of a virtuous loop. And we were able to keep our debt nationally under control, and we were able to do public good investments, right? Based on what we believe were, you know, good investments at the time, and they were at that point. We have to, so in the bigger macro picture, I think we have to think about those kinds of broader reform issues, but I think that it's unlikely that any government we have seen in the last while or see at the moment is likely to entertain that. But there will be pressure building from governments. And the Canadian Federation of Municipalities has kind of started to kind of gear into this issue. And I can bet your bottom dollar over the next 15 years as the crisis deepens, you're going to have more and more pressure for us to reclaim some of our sovereignty around aspects of that money creation. So anyway, it's kind of a different perspective. Like, I didn't even understand any of that before I started writing this book. So if you really want to do something and really integrate something, you know, write a book.
Thanks very much, Mike. I was thinking too, I was in such a rush to get this thing going that I probably broke a couple of the golden rules of trying to be an organization in the city. One of them is that hopefully when you guys came in, you notice the first slide, which is recognizing the funders. So as I think that Grace mentioned in her opening, is that there's 3 funders that have made this possible for us to bring in these speakers from Nova Scotia and Alberta and put this event on. And that's the Southern Interior Beetle Action Coalition, the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary. So Grace and any other director I'm not familiar with from the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary, thank you very much. And Columbia Basin Trust. I know that they were hoping to have a couple staff here, but they had several meetings, so I'm not sure that there is any here.